Welcome back to Brashenomics, everybody. My name is Heather Moore, and I am joined here right now with Glen Thiessen, who's a wealth advisor at Transitional Planning. And at Transitional Planning, Glen helps his clients navigate major changes in their life, such as marriage, divorce, career change, retirement, and death. Glen, how are you?
Very good. Thank you, Heather. It's good to be here.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate you joining me and braving the roads. It's not really the roads that you need to be afraid of. It's generally other people.
Right. You never know how the other driver is going to be driving.
Exactly. So, which I think actually today's weather relates really well to the topic you wanted to talk about. And what we wanted to get into today was ways to protect your assets. And I think before we get into all that, let's just talk about what that means in general, protecting your assets and what they are.
Well, yeah. What you want to do is probably think about what it is you're trying to protect. You know, we talk about the bad weather out there, the traffic, and so forth. So first thing you want to do is think about what are you doing almost unconsciously, like protective driving, defensive driving, watching out for the other person, slowing down, right? How do you protect your car? Well, you probably started with a key. You opened it up, you got a key, right? Well, what happens if you were to hit somebody, slide into somebody today, and then they decided to sue you? Well, you're not only protecting your car and possibly the other person.
And yourself.
You might be protecting your house, your savings, your investments, your future financial dreams basically could be evaporated if you were to be sued. You know, just because of a 30-second little, you looked the wrong way or the ice was in the wrong place.
Right. So pretty much, in essence, you theoretically almost carry around everything you own in your car.
Pretty much. So what you want to do is look at what kind of coverage do you have, right? What's your deductible? What are the limits on the medical insurance and that kind of thing? If it's not all that high and you do have assets that are worth protecting, you might want to think about umbrella liability coverage, for example, because that'll pick up where your car insurance leaves off. And speaking of health insurance, I mean, like, what if somebody gets hurt? Well, in an accident, your car insurance is going to cover that, not your medical plan. But let's talk about medical. You know, how's that protecting your assets, right? If you don't have a good medical plan, or you have a medical plan with a high deductible, and something goes wrong, well, you need to have that money in savings. You know what? If you don't have money in savings, you're going to probably go into debt, right?
Well, right. One of the main reasons people file for bankruptcy is because of medical bills. Something happens where, you know, they either get something like cancer, or their wife, you know, or children does, and eventually they use up their coverage and then are left with humongous bills.
Right. And that's another thing. If you, let's say, survive through an accident or so forth, but you're not able to work, what happens to your income? Right? Who's going to pay you when you can no longer come to work? Well, if you can't get that income and all of your future dreams were depending on that, how are you going to replace that income?
Yeah, and that's a good question, and I bet you a lot of people don't think about it.
No, they don't. As a matter of fact, that's one of the least thought about protections that out there.
Really?
Sometimes employers have short-term disability, maybe a long-term disability plan that'll last for 2 years or so.
If it was work-related or an accident on the job or something of that nature.
Right, but if you don't have your own personal protection, where if you change a job, you still have it, you know, that's a huge risk. You got to think about your economic worth. What are you going to earn over, you know, the rest of your working career? And if that's not insured, you are putting your whole future at risk.
Do you feel like sometimes people depend too much on the coverage that they get from work to cover their liability?
Yes, they do. Well, not only that, but if you do, you know, go out and try to buy it on your own, you're basically going to, I mean, that costs money, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people are on a pretty tight budget nowadays. And if you are fortunate enough to have a job, it's a struggle just to make it.
Yeah.
To make ends meet with just your income. Sometimes it takes 2 and 3 incomes.
Right.
So that's even more, you know, of a, it places the importance on having that income insured.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about some of the other risks. We talked about everything that goes into a car accident, everything's, in your car in terms of your personal worth and assets. But there's a lot of other things in areas where you need to make sure you are covered and where there's,
right,
potential for disaster.
It's interesting. I just got back from visiting my uncle in Florida. They bought this house, moved in, and 2 weeks after they moved in, they turned the switch on to turn the air conditioner on and caused a fire in the attic. Yes, 2 weeks after they moved into this house. So
hence the phrase Murphy's Law.
The insurance company came up with $125,000 to rebuild that house. Mm-hmm. What if he didn't have that insurance?
Yeah.
So again, what is the asset you're trying to protect, and what are the potential risks that might destroy that asset? And then what is the insurance or what type of protection do you have on there? So like for things like fire, theft, natural disasters, civil unrest, those types of things, you want to have an adequate liability plan, casualty insurance.
Right. Can you talk to us a little bit about civil unrest, what that means and the risk in that?
Well, recently in the news, we've seen, occupy this, occupy that. You got all kinds of crazy stuff going on. And if your property is not protected, you've seen stores, you've seen businesses be put out of business because of civil unrest.
Right.
So
and vandalism of that nature.
Vandalism, that kind of thing. So you want to be able to have that property protected. And generally, the most reasonable way to protect it is through an insurance plan.
Mm-hmm.
But then, you might own a house, and then perhaps you go into a second marriage, whether it's after a death or divorce and so forth. Now what? You've got a previous spouse with certain assets. You've got certain assets of your own. What about that prenuptial?
Right.
Okay. So who is ultimately going to get that? See, the different things that happen to you in your life can really impact what you have in place in terms of protecting the things that you've accumulated in your lifetime.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And we already kind of went into the health risks and
mm-hmm.
talked about insurance and disability, income, and long-term care. So let's kind of dive into examining, protection for adequacy and things of that nature.
Right. Well, what I do when we do an insurance review,
mm-hmm.
what we want to do is first of all figure out what your goals are. What do you have? What are those assets you want to protect?
Mm-hmm.
Then we look at looking at future current and future income sources, and then we look at existing insurance policies. What kind of coverage do you have currently?
Right.
What are you trying to protect? Right. So then we look at, what's covered in terms of personal income, other assets, health, investments, liabilities, death. And, it's interesting. I think of investments. If you have a diversified portfolio, that is a way of protecting those assets.
Right.
If you have
That's
everything.
what they always say.
Yeah. So there are things other than insurance that you can do to protect assets, right?
Okay.
So when it comes to insurance or investments, you want to diversify properly.
Mm-hmm.
For business, if you have a business, you've got key employees that make that business happen.
Right.
Right. And so you want to make sure that you retain those key employees.
Mm-hmm.
You want to provide them the kind of benefits that are going to be attractive for them to stay with you and not go to their competitors.
I'm sure Ben's listening to this right now.
And then if a key employee does leave, whether it's because they became disabled, died, or went to the competition, well, how are you going to protect your business?
Right.
Right? That's pretty serious. So then you got also overhead expenses. So, for example, a business owner has a personal budget, but they also have a business budget.
Mm-hmm.
And if that owner of the business can no longer do his job, he still has not only his personal budget, but the business budget.
And what you don't want to mix those up is what I've learned.
No, and there's a different kind of coverage for the business expenses
mm-hmm.
because your personal disability plan is not going to cover the business expenses,
mm-hmm.
right? Matter of fact, like for liability coverage, umbrella liability coverage, personal, you have to have that for covering personal assets, but that's not going to cover, like when I have people come to my office, my personal liability insurance is not going to cover that situation.
Right.
So I had to have a separate business liability coverage.
More work.
Just in case. Yeah. So you can go nuts with all this insurance and stuff, but it's just important to know what the risks are, because if that one thing happens that you hoped didn't, and you never anticipated it will, but if it does, it can be the thing that wipes you out.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about planning all the time, and an important part of that is, like you said, trying to figure out what all the potential risks are and how you can best cover yourself. And I think that's definitely one of the keys to success. And Glenn, we have about one more minute here, time for one more question. And I want you touched on it a little bit, but I want to talk about covering shortfalls in your protection a little bit more.
Right. Well, once we identify what you have in place, then we want to look at, okay, what is short? Okay. Where are you short? Are you missing something completely? Or
what would be an example of that?
Well, like, for example, if you have short-term disability through your employer, but he doesn't have long-term disability, that's perfect for you to pick up a long-term disability plan on your own that would start where the short-term disability ends. Okay. Right? So dovetail them together, kind of, cover your bases more thoroughly.
That's what I was just going to say.
Well,
that's all the time we have. Thank you so much, Glenn. We appreciate that. Always love the information you bring to us. Anyway, that was Glen Thiessen, Wealth Advisor with Transitional Planning. My name's Heather Moore, and we'll be right back. You're listening to Brashenomics.